Hey folks, it's another episode of Bob. Anyway, quick message to all you folks that very generously bought me a pint. Thank you so bloody much. I've responded to each and every one of you individually. No, I'm kind of a little bit overwhelmed really with the generosity of some folk. There's no obligation. I don't expect it. That's why I'm overwhelmed by it. Thank you very much to each and every one of you. Now, enjoy this episode. It might get a little bit boring because we're just down to a bare chassis. There's your spoiler. So in this episode, I'm really going to be tearing the chassis down to its bare bones, assessing what I need to do as far as welding it back to its original structure. And also, I have a little tinker with that engine. Yeah, that engine's not good. No. You can see I've also trimmed this little bit on my beard because I was getting fed up with eating my moustache every time I have food. That's just gross. It really is. I'm going to be driving home this week. I'm going to take the opportunity to do a bit of extended driving to go and do a bit of exercise. Feeling a bit homesick really because, you know, I do speak to the missus fairly regularly, but I've got to take a GM Blue. I haven't got to. I've offered to take a GM Blue back to my house, and then his owner can come and get him because he's sitting over here at the moment. Hello, a GM Blue. So I'm going to go home. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to bring the stag back down to Devon. Oh yes. Yes. There's a couple of jobs I want to... I mean, as if I haven't got enough on my plate already with Bob. As if I haven't got enough already. Sorry, Rowan Atkinson, you do it way better than I do. Because I haven't got enough already, I just thought I'd bring the stag down here because that needs a bit of work doing to it, nods and sods. And also, the stag's 50th birthday is on the 7th of June, correct me if I'm wrong. It's 50 years since the launch of the stag. My stag is 48 in August. And the Range Rover, the venerable, most beautiful, two beautiful cars I own actually. Well, actually I own 5 of them. And the Range Rover, 17th of June, was launched in 1970. So 1970 was a good year for some real, design icons. And while the Range Rover, took the world by storm and became a design icon that ended up in the Louvre, etc., briefly. So the scale model you see at the British Motor Museum at Gaydon, I can't remember the exact name of it because it used to be called the Gaydon Motor Museum, but it's not anymore. The scale model they've got there is the one I believe that was exhibited at the Louvre. So it wasn't a full-size Range Rover, but a scale model of it, because it was deemed as such a style icon, a design icon. As you well know, I've got a particular love for two-door Range Rovers. Yeah, and then the Stag, of course, came along and destroyed a complete brand. Anyway, we'll do little videos about the Stag and the Range Rover as they approach their birthday, as the model approaches its birthday. And I'll do a little bit of a chit-chat about them and what I know about them and observations. And, if you want to get one of them, what you should really be looking for. But that's Bob. Enjoy the video. Thumbs up, thumbs down, subscribe. If you absolutely must buy me a pint, the link is in the description below. But thank you very much to all those that have done. Might not all be spent on beer. I might buy an external mic. Camera's behaving itself at the moment. I found out what the problem was with it. Firmware upgrade. But I might buy a mic external. And so you guys can hear me swearing when I'm on the other side of the barn then. Hours and hours and hours of fun. Okie dokie. Right, let's rip this thing apart. What I'll do, I'm going to get... I'll leave it like that for the time being. I'm going to get the heads off it. I'm going to get the clutch flywheel off it, reduce some of the weight. I can't get the fan disconnected from the water pump. So I'll see if I can get the whole front timing cover off. Or I might just have to sacrifice the water pump pulley. I don't particularly want to be making a huge great mess in here. But I do need taking up less room than this. So I'm going to do a lot of it, I think, on the floor like this. Let's start by getting, I'm going to get the toolkit. Yeah, what is it? Silly arse. Sometimes these. Oh look, pilot bush came out with it. So that wasn't very tight in there, was it? Pilot bush is as loose as fuck in there. Anyway, so we've got a brand spanking new, absolutely brand spanking new, I don't know who made it. It's Bald and Beck cover, a Bald and Beck plate. Well, there's a bit of expense for you. Brand spanking new. Look at that. That's beautiful. Right, that's going to go in the pile of interesting bits to keep hold of. What are we talking about? Yes, the pilot bush is fucked. I don't know why that is so loose in there. Normally you have to pull them out, but you can see that's as loose as anything. Which will not have helped it. Yeah, I don't know what I was talking about now. Oh, jobs to do. Yeah, so I've not ordered the fuel tank yet, but I will. And then I can finish off Sandy. I get that done. I had to move it because Dad needs to come up and pick up his shopping. He did a click and collect jobby, which is the safest way because he leaves the bags out and they put all the cases out on the back of his car and he loads all the stuff himself and then they come and take the cases away and there's no contact. It's all social distancing. And he's more than happy with that. What I might do actually, these ones are especially high tensile, I will put these back in. Might as well do it for all of you. Actually, there's a top tip for the day. When you take something apart, just reposition the bolts roughly from whence they came. So yeah, I kind of still got the kind of the lawnmower tank in Sandy. Turned the ignition key, thought it hasn't started. Fucking had. It was sitting there purring away, happy as anything. Running beautifully that. So that's a sweet engine in there. And this one I suspect is going to end up being a boat anchor. Largely because it's got no identity and it's seized and it's full of water. But apart from that, it's got a lot going for it. Heads will be useful, crank may be useful, pistons and conrods, I don't know. Until I get it all apart, I don't know. But that's what this exercise is for. But worst case scenario, actually best case scenario for this is the block gets turned into a table. I'm not into ringing bloody engine numbers and stuff like that. There's enough Rover BOBs out there with identity on them that I don't have to use one that's had its identity ground off it. I don't know why the identity's been ground off it, I've got no idea. We will find out. It's not cross-bolted, no. It's not really anything fancy like a 4.6. Right, now this should come off here. It comes. It's got a bit of weight to him. Again, that's nicely, I reckon that's been skimmed. So that's in good shape. Nice flywheel. Just position the bolts back in here again. I'll do that. Right, let's get the heads off next. I might swivel it around. The weight will be significant less weight on this thing now. Because honestly it weighs, flywheel itself, it's got a fair amount of weight to it. Right, let me swivel you round, put a bit of wood under there because I don't want the fucking oil pump's going to rest on the floor anyway, so bollocks to it. Can't be arsed with that. Right, now let's get this should come out. All this crap on the top here can all go in and out. Bugger off, ½ inch to get these two off. We'll see what we've got inside the V of the engine. Okie dokie. Now, this should come off now. Now, when you come to these gaskets, this is a Valley gasket I'm looking at here. Be careful, these things are tin and they are fucking razor sharp. Well, there's not extensive Black Death in there. Okay, I've just poured a load of shit in there, but there's not extensive Black Death in there. Stinks though. Fucking stinks. Right, let's have this dipstick tube out. That should pull out in theory. Might have to twist it out. Dipstick can come out because that's useful. There it comes. Dipstick tube is useful. Although this is a later dipstick tube, it's one for a later car. Get out. Just clean things up as I fall them apart. It's all a bit twisted and bent really. Quite a soft bit of tube though. There we go, you're in there. Right, next. These are fucking useless. Again, I took the plugs out and I put loads of diesel oil and stuff in there in the vain hope that I might be able to get the engine to turn again. But that ain't gonna happen. I probably should put some gloves on, shouldn't I? Let's go get some gloves and we can start pulling these heads off. I think I'm just going to get these screws undone. Yes. This can come off. Well, that one's not thinking about turning off. I'll have to get the impact driver on that one. No. And yes. Come on, you bastard. Ah, get the box of screwdrivers. It's a crosshead screw, I know, and I'm putting a flat blade in it because sometimes the flat blade will work across the cross, across the cross, across the cross, the cross, like that one. Hey, you don't want to know though? Oh, yes, he does. So that works. See me? Comes. Again, not a huge amount of Black Death in there. There is in there though. That's fucking horrendous. That needs a deep cleanse, that does. Right. Fuck you first. Fuck me. Let's get this crap out of the way. Crap out of the way. Now this head should come off. And it does. Oh! Oh! Oh, that's nasty. Water in this one's been up to here. Yeah, this thing's not pretty, is it? Let's go and using one, this one. Let's take the razor sharp gasket off. Right, let's get Mr. Mullet. Off he comes. That bolt just needs a little bit more winding. Thought it did. There he comes. There's normally a stud on this bottom one down here because you can't get to it because the bloody oil pump is in the way, or the oil filter housing is in the way, and so it's just one of those things. Right, let's pop that in there so it dribbles all its oil out. And underneath we've got usual baggy chain, camshaft gear, which will be useful, so we'll get that off. All bits like camshaft gears, spaces and so forth, they're always useful. So we'll have all of that. Oh, so 9/16 I reckon, no 5/8. Bit tight. Useful, and that should come off there as well. Useful. Again, signs this thing's been running quite hot. It's a burnt oil in there. It's not the end of the world though. And then this chain should come off. We'll see if the camshaft rotates. Just slides off 2 woodruff keys. And there's the 2 gears. And never reuse these things. They're cheap enough. You just put new on every bloody time. Woodruff keys might come out. They might not. Again, they're very useful. Let's see if we can lever and force on one of the lobes. No, I think that camshaft is in there and seized. Give it a tap. We get the shift. There's a nice lobe there. There it comes. Gives me an indication about the engine, that's all. I'd say it's a very warm camshaft, that one. I certainly wouldn't look at reusing that. Look at that lobe on the back there, it's almost flat. Right, okay, that's that. Camshaft's out. Now, let's get this thing rolled over and get the sump off. Actually looks really clean. Okay, it's got gloop and gob all over it, but we'll have to, what I'll do is I'll unbolt various pistons and see if I can get some pistons out. A lot of them aren't, they're not going to shift. And if I can get some of the pistons out, then I might be able to lift the crankshaft out. Got silicon. Love silicon. We really love silicon. And I was also anticipating this sump would have rusted through from the inside, but it hasn't. Managed to get most of these big end cap bolts out. The 3 big end caps you can see, so what's that, number 5, number 4 and number 2 are the ones that are deepest down. And I haven't got my bloody 1/2 inch step spanner with me, which is a pain in the backside. Bearings are, I've got one bearing out, shot, as is predictable. Not the worst I've seen, but not good. Standard Vandervelde bearing, so it's a standard engine. crank's never been ground before. If I'm going to use this crank again, though, it will need to be crack tested. Now, I can't get in there to undo them because I haven't got my step spanner. So what I'm going to do is actually release the main bearing caps and see if I can lift the crank up and manoeuvre it in such a way that I can actually start to get the things down. I've got a feeling none of the conrost in this thing I'm going to trust. So I've just been kind of tucking them down, drifting them down. Most of them are moving, actually, surprisingly. But anyway, I'll come back to you. Bose self-leveling strut, this big fella at the back here. A little bit misunderstood sometimes what these things actually do. They're part of the A-frame setup. So this A-frame that you can see here, this is critical for axle location. Okay, absolutely critical. Now on the Range Rovers, they put this self-leveling strut in here and that allowed them to, in theory, on production cars, not this one, put in softer springs on the back end of the car, give it a smoother ride at the back. So what the Bose self-leveling strut does, first of all, this is a highly pressurised container. Has an awful lot of pressure in it when it's working properly. I think even when they're dead, I'd be wary about taking one apart. But effectively what they do is once the car starts to move, the geometry of this A-frame setup and the way that the Bose strut sits in it, it does level up the back end of the car. Now, the actual strut itself is located to the main rear cross member we've got here via these long bolts that go right through. And then it's located onto the A-frame at the bottom there via a joint, which is underneath the bellows there somewhere. And the A-frame itself is just part of a standard Land Rover Defender kind of setup, really, for anything that's got these live axles. I think the Defenders all had A-frames on them, and they're secured to the bottom end of this cross member. Now, to get this thing apart, there's a girt big 22mm or 24mm nut that needs to be taken off the bottom there. Now, sometimes, well, I suppose on the Range Rover, let's get down here, on the Range Rover, there's a spoiler for you, it's out already. On the Range Rover, you have to kind of jack the back end of the car up because you can't access this nut because the fuel tank sits down in front of it. So by jacking the car up, the axle drops down and you can gain access to it. Now, really, you want to kind of suspend the body if you're doing this shit. So have some long stands to support the body because you're underneath the fuel tank, and what you basically need to do is to take that nut off. Then sometimes I find a hearty good tap here with a trusty £5 hammer, or a little jemmy between there and the bottom of the joint just pops it out. Okay, and that's all that's happened here. Now I can see this joint is absolutely and utterly fucked. This thing would be doing nothing. So it needs to come apart anyway for the axle to be removed. But that's how you get the joint out. Now, in order to replace that ball joint, you need to separate it from the A-frame and also from the Bose self-leveling unit, which is a pain. However, we're going to do that now with this particular car. One of the things you can tell whether these things are fucked or not, pardon the expression there, is that this unit should be almost impossible to compress. And I can tell you now, that one is dead. That is a dead unit. However, I'll hang on to it because I hang on to the dead units, waiting in hope for someone to start refurbishing these units again. At the moment, there's an option from Kingsley Cars. They seem to be advertising a brand spanking new or refurbed unit. And the other option is to go for used old stock units. And if you're buying used old stock, really you want to make sure that this canister is unmessed around with and cannot be compressed. If that's the case, the ball joints at the top and the bottom and this ball joint at the back here, they're all easily replaced. So those are the least of your problems. You can do away with the damn thing. You can take this whole thing out, leave the A-frame in place because that's critical, because otherwise the chassis moves around. Yeah, absolutely critical, that A-frame. And where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so if you get rid of that Bose unit, then you'll need to put tougher springs on the back end of the car. But for a Range Rover, I really wouldn't recommend it. It's part of the suspension geometry. It's part of the ride and comfort of the car. Why would you want to take it out? I'm going to undo these bolts now because it gets noisy with this, and I'll have the radio on. And I'm going to undo these 4 bolts at the top here. That will release this whole top bracket from the cross member. Then I'm going to undo these 2 bolts here, which will release the bottom end of the Bose unit, which is attached to the A-frame pivot, and just leave these two A-frame bars on the car. And we'll come back to that in a second. So I'll just go and do those 6 bolts, and then I'll come back to you. Right, here we go. So obviously you can get this thing off with the body and everything removed. It's a lot easier when it's like this, but then if you really want to remove the boot floor at your Range Rover in order to get this thing out, it's entirely possible to do this though with the unit all in place. Now, the gauge from the bottom of this is split and you should not be able to compress that. So that is fucked, as is the ball joint on the bottom end of it. So the ball joint on the bottom end of the Bose unit, actually, no, it's got notches all over the place. And there's another ball joint at the top here. That was serviceable, but it's pointless because the unit itself is not scrap, ready for someone to refurb. Now, there's a couple of things I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to take these A-frames off. So, one thing I did note, by the way, on this, interesting point to note, Mr. Gravity, is that all of these bolts that I've pulled off are all in really good order. I suspect they were replaced as part of the kind of the rebuild, the restructure of this car. Everything's covered in a thick coating of wax. Not much lube on the bolts themselves. I might tend to lube these things up with copper grease and so forth to ease the next person down the line. But look, they're all like, well, not like new, but certainly not 49 years old. Okay, now to get these A-frames off, there's a bloody great big nut and bolt that goes through underneath this cross member here. Like I said, they're a pain in the arse. You will curse them to the end of your days. Now, this one might undo, but what I'll end up doing, on the early cars, the cars with the square cross member, not the round cross member, you've got 3 bolts, which are there, and there, which hold the bracket, the supporting bracket for each A-frame. What I'll do is I'll bring it over here. These are the 2 of the bolts here, so these 2 here are on the forward end of the mounting bracket that supports that A-frame, and there's the rearmost bolt. And then we've got exactly the same on the driver's side, and these 2 down here. Obviously the round cross section are completely different, and the bracket, this bracket here that's bolted on, is welded onto the round section, so you then have to battle with those bolts. That big bastard there. And these ones have been put on back to front, because normally the nut's on the inboard side, but I guess these have been put on back to front because someone's taken the bracket off and had to get these off in the past, where you can't get the nut off them because they just seize on solid. And I think it's just because they're in the firing line for all manner of road crap that it causes problems. My top tool today, by the way, has been the 3-foot jimmy. Oh yes. Okay, we'll get these A-frame bars off, and then I shall remove the rear springs. How about that? Dampers can stay in place until the springs are out. I've kind of got a weird thing about dampers now, off before springs, even though they're not even fucking connected. Thank you, Southpaw. I shouldn't joke about it, guys. Now, it might get a little bit noisy now, so I might edit this out, or speed it through, or do something with it, but let's see if we can get that on there, followed by, let's chuck this on the floor here, just saves it falling on the floor, like this. Ah, ding! Sorry. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you what I am talking about. Thirsty Ferret. Amber Ale. I was having these yesterday, wasn't I? It's just done. Oh. That's not a bad drop, that. Oh, yes. Oh, get used to that. Right. Hat hard on, off. Hard hat on. Air cable out of the way. That'll be that one off. That's good news. Oh. These things happen. Right, that's one-handed ankle grinder action. I do not recommend it, chaps. But, you know, I'm an idiot. So what we've basically got now, look at this A-frame here. This is the bracket that bolts onto the bottom of that chassis rail. I can take that bolt out now. So these bolts are fairly clean. They're not bad, but the heads have just corroded away. And there we've got, that's where I cut the bolt away from. Next thing I need to do is probably just take that piece of thread off there and go at this with an angle grinder. Sorry, go at this with the impact wrench and get this bolt out. And then I can press the bush for now out of that and refurb it. Well, that's that one done. One A-frame arm. Oh, we're going to need another. So how come that fucking broke then? Gravity! Yes. Thank you. Right, now, getting these spring retaining plates out of the bottom here for now. Probably shouldn't say that, should I? There's normally 2 bolts going into a threaded plate, and I can feel the threaded plate is still intact under there, so let's give it a go. I'm not entirely sure what the worst is going to happen is, but I've got a number of long extension bars. It looks like it's 9/16. It might be a 5/8, we don't know yet. Drop it down inside the turret. 9/16 is good. We're going to need another extension bar though. Have I got another one of these? I've probably got a short one. A short one in here. Normally these back springs aren't this tall. In this particular case they are. Right. That one's undoing, which is nice. How very pleasant are you? So once these retaining plates are undone, then I can effectively lift the back end of the chassis off its springs. Oh, good. But the danger at the moment is, with the axle wibbling side to side, is that the springs might decide to come out. For fuck's sake, if you've ever dropped a road spring, you don't have to drop them very far in height for them to recoil, bounce a significant distance back upwards, normally towards a freshly painted surface or your mother's car or something along those lines, something you really don't want it to land on. It's going to land on it. So that's why we take these charged projectiles off and stand them on the shelf over there, where they can cause less damage. That's that one, I think. There we go. So the remains of a retaining strap there. It's not a very good one. It can go in the recyc. I'll put new ones on anyway. Let's put all these nuts and bolts and things in the box of nuts and bolts. Another rather pathetic and dismal string retaining strap. Right, now in theory, if I was Hercules, I'd be able to lift this thing up and the springs would drop out. It's close, isn't it? Right, now what I'll do is I'll get the engine mount crane on the back. I'll just lift the back end of the chassis up, just do it in a nice controlled fashion, because otherwise I'll end up hurting myself. But, oops, nearly knocked the camera on the floor. If there were standard springs, I would be less cautious. Isn't the right word. No, it's absolutely not the right word, because I'm always cautious when it comes to suspension and very heavy bits of metal. But in this particular case, I think it needs utmost of respect. These blue projectiles we've got on the back of the landing. Right, Except the problem I've got here is that I've completely and utterly buried the engine crane. So let me pause while I get the engine crane out, and then we'll resume. Right. We don't have to go absolutely fucking berserk with this thing, but all I'm going to do is attach one of these hawsers so it goes around and back onto the hook. Not far off it. Take that off. Just dangle that one over there. Bring them around. Put them back on again. These hawsers are rated to 19.5 tons. I don't like hawsers generally, but I think for half a ton we'll be alright. Probably father's bringing me beer. I'm jacking it up. Probably best not on there. Oh, alright. Put it on the bench, please, Dave. Thank you. Oh, marvellous. More beer. Right. So we're still uncompressing the springs. We have got the springs into an uncompressed state. Like that. That's a big fucking spring, that. I'll measure them in a minute. They're going to end up on Bay of E. It's got a new-ish. It's not an original spring mounting plate, so that's been put on there as well, but as you can see, it succumbed to some salt water damage. Nothing Mr. Grip Blaster can't sort out. It's nice of my dad bring me over beer, wasn't it? Right, this is going to come up this way. There we go. Nice. Right, that's the other spring. Now I feel far happier now working with this fucker. So what I'll do is I will lower it down. There we go. Safer, huh? I think so. So does my finger. I mean, obviously, if you've got the body on the car, you can still lift it. How would you lift it? Probably using a jack, to be honest. It's obviously just safest doing it like that, really. Just taking the rear springs out. I can still roll the car, still manoeuvre it around. Yeah. A bit more compact now, isn't it? Low rider. Right, that's a step forwards. Okay, didn't bother videoing a lot of this for some reason, I don't know why. But I've been stripping down the front end ready to remove the springs and drop it down onto the bump stops, much like I have on the back axle here, which has involved largely taking the steering box off, which is actually in really good order. I've given it a quick check over. There doesn't appear to be any more than the regulation limit of wear on it, but it has been leaking. Now I suspect lots of the leaking is because the pipes were taken off and then the steering was operated, which of course would just pump the fluid out over the outside. So I'm going to give it a darn good clean up and check it over, but that steering box could be a goer. Happy with that. Even the ball joint on it's good. Taking the panhard rod off the front, a link rod that connects it up, stops the axle from going wibbling from side to side. Dampers came off the front. There are, and oh, excuse me a second, long way down there. They're an all makes, made in England. Blah, 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 blah. One of them is beautiful. Good pressure, good pressure. Other one is ruined. It's got that much play on it. So, pair of scrap front dampers. However, I think the springs will live another day on another car. Now, while I was down here, I've been looking at this thing for the last couple of weeks. And I don't know what I thought it was. But I think at some point, a dog has lost his tune. If you know who this belongs to, I'm happy to post it back to you. Might be a bit oily now. Things you find. Yeah, so I'm going to give up now because it is 7 o'clock. And yeah, I think we're all right here. Just going to schedule. I mean, bearing in mind I didn't get out of bed till midday today. I don't know why. It's a Saturday. It happens. Front steering arm, nice Kermit green. Bose unit, dead. Oh, these turrets. The damper turrets. I reckon these were fairly new. They've still got a lot of powder coating that's still really shiny on the inside. So I don't reckon they were that old when they went on the car. So I'm going to give those a shot blast. Clean them up, paint them with some chassis paint. And they can go back on it again. And the spring retainer rings. These things with the thread poking out the top. You see the thread is really clean as well. So I think someone put new spring retainers on there. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. It saves me buying new ones. I shall use those again. Springs, however, they're a bit too beefy for me. If you want these lifted springs, drop me a message. I mean, to be honest, they've got bugger all value to me, and I've got so many springs. But if you want to lift a Range Rover by that mount, then yeah, I've got 4 springs here. Yeah, make me an offer. They're worth a few quid in scrap, but other than that, I don't think they've been used that much. The powder coatings come off them. I've got no idea what they are or where they've come from. If you want details, I can measure them. The unsprung length of these springs, I can count the coils through if you want me to. But yeah, I'd rather they were reused for an off-road project rather than me just weighing them in. I'll put it that way. I've got nothing against off-roading Range Rovers or Land Rovers at all. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I just think that a bog standard Land Rover, Range Rover is far more capable than a lot of people think. And your really serious off-roaders need this stuff. But then your really serious off-roaders have got budget not to be buying second-hand chunky parts off Bob. Proper low riding. Check out that. What's that? About half a boot's height on those springs. So basically the bump stops on the chassis are resting on the axles because I've taken all the springs out. Set of high lift springs there, up for grabs for someone. I'll measure them. If you're interested, I'll measure them. Contact me. I'm after a drink, plus postage and packing, of course, or collection. I do drive. I mean, I'm likely to be going back to High Wycombe this week, so we'll see. Right, this engine, as you've seen, I've been stripping it down. There's bits of it that I'm going to keep, and there's bits of it that I'm going to chuck out. And unfortunately, the block is going to be one of those bits that ends up getting chucked out. Now, I started to strip it down. As you can see here, this thing has had a bit of a water problem. Now, I wasn't sure really what the root cause of this thing was. As you can see, some of the pistons have come out, coming out. It's because the crank cannot rotate. I can't get that conrod out of that bore. Someone's also drilled out the engine number, helpfully, not me. But as you can see, those bores are in a fairly terrible state. It's unlikely that this block would survive without a significant rebore or even a re-sleeve. And to be frank, oh Betty, there are better blocks out there. Now, what I was doing, because I can't finish off getting the crank, I need to find out if the crank's any good on this thing. The crank may be good, I don't know. The crank's got life in it, I'll keep it. The rest of it's going in the bin. Standard bearings, but the main bearing shells were fucked. They're down to the copper. Okay, I've not got that many big end shells out, but the big end shells, they're not much better. They're tired, but it's got original standard Van der Velde bearings in it. So, shame, but I think what actually happened with it, unfortunately, was that whoever was off-roading made a mistake, got a little bit too deep and managed to suck quite a lot of water into the air intake. There was no water in the oil filter. There was no water in the gearbox or the transfer box. I haven't checked the axles yet. That'll be the next thing to check. But the engine had about 7 litres of water in it. in the sump. Now, I don't think that the water in the sump was anything to do with the reason for the engine's demise. I think what happened was someone tried to see if they could fix it it had a hydraulic lock situation. You can see there where the water's been resting in the bores. So I stripped one of the heads down. Right, let's go to the one. This is what they look like when I pulled them off the engine. And I was quite surprised because some of where the washers and so forth go, they're looking really, really clean, this casing. But inside looks like Black Death, but it ain't Black Death because it's soft, really soft. So it's either thick axle oil, but it didn't smell like that. It smells like wax. So I decided I was going to strip one of the heads down for shits and giggles because it's Sunday and I've got nothing better to do with my Sunday. So I'm waiting for bits. And this is the head. So this is it after maybe half an hour in the parts washer using a bit of TFR on it. It cleaned up reasonably well. As you can see, not bad, eh? For half an hour. All the threads are good in it. I don't know if it's flat yet or not. The head gaskets did show signs of blowing for now. Where are they? They're down here. I have to be careful with them because they're tin head gaskets and they are fiendishly fucking sharp. Let's hang that one up there and get the other one out and then we can talk through head gaskets. You just have to be careful with these things because if you get it wrong and you run your finger along the edge here, these things slice you open. So this one has blown there, you can see it. If I lay it on the ground, you can very clearly see that that one has blown there. Okay, but the rest of this gasket, I think, is intact. You can see the fire rings are non-disturbed all the way around, except for there, that's where it's blown. And if we flip him over, again, all the fire rings are okay, except that's blown there, you can see it. Same cylinder. It's not even blown here. My car, when it went, it blew there and there into the water jacket, which was pressurising the cooling system. So this one blew into the V, which meant that this cylinder would have been low on compression, but it wouldn't necessarily have caused a huge running problem. It wouldn't have pressurised the cooling system and so forth, because that there could well be because of the outer row of bolts being too tight. The other gasket, I didn't actually make a note of which ones were which, unfortunately. Sorry, folks. Doesn't make any bloody difference. The engine's scrap anyway. But the other gasket, it looks all right. Okay, it's oil and shit all over the place. It might have gone here. Might have gone there. But if it had, it did it in like its last stroke, so to speak. So what happens when you get water into an air intake? Well, the engine, if it's running over, will be gobbling up litres of air per second. Google it, I don't know exactly how much, but it draws an awful lot of air. So when water gets anywhere near the air intake, it's going to suck it into that engine faster than a $40 hooker. That was unnecessary, Richard. So what then happens is, you've got the intake side of the cylinder head here. So we've got the V. No, I didn't want to chuck that away. It launched itself into the scrap metal box. It's not a push rod, but I use it for probing. So we've got the exhaust on this side, and we've got the inlet on this side. So ignore these two on the end. On the Rover V8, these two here, they're water jacket. These two are water jacket. So you've got the inlet here. And because I think this one is the left-hand cylinder head while you're facing the engine driver's side, you've got cylinder 2, 4, 6 and 8 on the inlet side. So what basically would have happened is the carburettors would have then said, great, let's have a load of water, and sucked it in as fast and as hard as they possibly could. Now, what then happens is the water comes pouring through the inlet valves. It doesn't compress. It sits on top of the pistons come up and they think, hang about a second, I was doing, I don't know, 3,500 RPM, and all of a sudden I can't move any further, so the engine just stops dead and it will seize. Now, you'll cause untold damage, and the reason I wanted to take the crank out of this was to find out if the crank's bent. If it's not bent, I'll keep it. Conrods are likely to be scrapping this thing, because the chances are the conrods will all be bent. And any cylinder that have water in it on the upward stroke, they'll be bent. And we'll get those out and have a look. But that said, you can see here, the inlet valve, salty water corrosion, salty water corrosion, salty water corrosion, salty water corrosion. And when I was taking this thing apart, there was like, these inlets were just full of sand. So I don't know where it happened. I don't think, see, one of my theories was, well, maybe it wasn't hydraulic lock. Maybe the car got flooded. But then there was bugger all water in the gearbox or transfer box. I haven't checked the axles yet. There was no water at all in transfer box or gearbox. So I think that this one would have been one that the owner would have thought, oh, darn it all. Now, the other thing I found out is that the exhaust ports, we've got one here, one here, one here, one here. They're very sooty, really sooty. So this thing was running mega rich. Really, far too rich. This thing would have been chuntering along like a good one. So the bearings were down to copper. The car ingested a shitload of salty water. It locked itself. It went bang and died. But that said, there's things I can get off it. So I think that both of these heads, I'll have them pressure tested. The guides on them, so the guides, the upper part of the guides, these are early style guides. They don't take the later style oil seals. So it's the early style guides. They're all pretty good. Okay, right on the bottom edge, you can see where they're corroded. There. But if I take the corresponding valve, and I've cleaned all these valves up now, but if I take the corresponding valve for that one, so we've got, it's the, is it that one? No, it's that one. Sorry, we've got cylinder number 1, cylinder number 5. So it's cylinder number 1 inlet, goes into its guide. Beautiful. I think these were quite new guides, because there's no play in that at all. So my plan for this thing, give it a damn good clean up. I mean, I've got rid of the worst of the crap off it. This cylinder here I went over with a wire brush. It's a bit brutal, but I did it just in the combustion chamber, not on the head face, because I wanted to find out if the seat edges here, the valve seat edges, were serviceable, and I think they are. On all of the valves, the inlets are all shagged out because they're old, I think. But again, the valve seats are actually quite good. There's a few pits and things here where I think a lot of the salty water sat. But the exhaust valves cleaned up really nicely. And that one was that exhaust valve there. Look at that. That'll go nicely. And then all of these springs, collets, washers, caps and everything, cleaned everything up. So just gave it a thorough degrease. Didn't go brutal with it. Nothing's been anywhere near anything other than a parts washer. I'll check the springs, but none of the springs are broken. None of the valves appear to be bent. So yeah, I think when it comes to hydraulic lock, it's unlikely, because the only cylinders that will be suffering from hydraulic lock will be the ones that have got both valves closed. So it's unlikely you're going to bend a valve, unless the timing chain broke as a result of it and the engine was able to rotate another time. Then you, pardon me, might end up with bent valves. But why does that thing look like 4 owls looking at me? It does, doesn't it? 4 owls. 4 candles. So yeah, heads I can save, I think. I think there's value in those heads. Pair of heads. I've got the exhaust manifolds off it. I might get the crank out of it. I've got the crank pulley off it. I've got the front cover off it. That's all savable. Sump is savable. I'm having that. All the nuts and bolts, savable. I'm having those. Block, pistons, conrods, scrap. I'll have the engine mounts off it. It had a nearly new, I would say it's probably done about 5 miles clutch on it. Camshaft was as knackered as I've seen them. This thing is, so this is where kind of end up with a mixed message really from this engine. So they've gone to all the effort of having the heads rebuilt, I think, because the valve guides are so good, and then neglected the camshaft, which is absolutely fucked. I can't imagine this thing. I mean, this lobe here, this is on the back end, so this will be on cylinder number 8 exhaust. I mean, that lobe's almost flat. It's shagged out. This camshaft really, I mean, the one I took out of my car, out of L95, the 1993 car, that had done, that had done 195,000 miles when I changed the camshaft on it because the head gasket blew, and I thought, well, I might as well do the camshaft at the same time. That was in better shape than this one. And all of the hydraulic tappets on this engine as well were knackered. They all, I mean, they look okay, and you think, yeah, that's nice and shiny, that'll work. But when you look at the bottom face of it, you can see there's a very, very definite and quite pronounced dish on the bottom of that hydraulic tappet. They're worn out, properly worn out. The hydraulic tappets are neither here nor there, and camshafts are neither here nor there, but I've got another engine block in the barn in there. I've got the Rover SD1 engine block that came in Allen, the 1972 Range Rover. And I'm looking into how I can get the maximum number of horses out of that 3.5, maybe even 3.9 as it turns out, engine, to replace this one with no ID and a seized crank. Oh dear, oh dear. But never mind. If anyone knows what happened to Bob, because I would imagine that when someone did that, there would have been a very, very loud shout of profanity, oh darn it all. And they were probably up to their bloody necks in water as well, because the car would not have gone any further than the bottom of the bloody bombhole that it was in. So it would have had to be dragged out. But the inside of the chassis, you see, is all right. I need to give it a proper good going over. I mean, it's nothing serious. When I got the chassis off the axles, I will tip it upright and see how much rust and shit comes out of it. Because depending on how much this chassis is rotting in from the inside out, depends on how much I decide I'm going to actually keep it. At the moment, the chassis has got a stay of execution. I think it's a good one. Well, no. Yeah, you guys think I'm a lunatic, don't you? But yeah, I'm going to weld the ends on this. I'm going to weld the body mounts back on it. I'm going to extend it back to its full length. And yeah, it will see life again, as the majority of this chassis is going to be a 1971 Range Rover, registered June 1971 on a J plate. The majority of the chassis is there. I can do it. Okay, it's down to its bare bones, more or less now. Well, the chassis certainly is. Oh, there we go.